We're still in the Principles and Frameworks module, and this is a lecture on methodologies. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you a quick tour of 5 different methodologies that we're going to look at in more detail in our learning activity. This is just to kind of give you a little bit of a background and context on those methodologies, and flag some of the key characteristics of them. So let's start with grounded theory, which is perhaps the most well-known of the qualitative methodologies. So we're going to start with a book that was published in 1967 called The Discovery of Grounded Theory, Strategies for Qualitative Research, which was written by Barney Glaser, who was a quantitative researcher, and Aslam Strauss, who was a sociologist. Discovery was one of the first formal documents about how to do field research. So prior to that, the practice of field research had very much been an oral tradition, so people were kind of apprenticed to more experienced researchers. Discovery, the book was a call to sociology, which is kind of where it was situated, not simply to think differently about the development of theory. So up until that point, sociology had been interested in testing theories in a very deductive way, and these were theories that often had been kind of developed in what was sometimes people rudely suggest was basically armchairs. And grounded theory was a kind of a call to get excited about the development of theory that was grounded in data. So so very much an inductive approach of generating data and then developing theory from that data. So this was about ideas, about new, novel, original ideas, and kind of more middle range theory. So theory that could be explored empirically. The book was more about the approach of grounded theory and making an argument for the methodology than it is a kind of practical set of guidelines for doing it. So the book was is very much a marker in qualitative research, but there's a couple of things that it challenged, and that firstly was it challenged the idea or the belief that qualitative research was impressionistic and unsystematic. So the discovery of grounded theory is very much about putting forward an argument for a very systematic approach to research. It challenges the idea of separating data collection and analysis phases. And we've talked a little bit about this already on this course. So the idea of having an iterative relationship between data collection and analysis. It also challenged the idea that qualitative research was only useful as a precursor to more rigorous quantitative. And finally, it challenged the assumption that qualitative could not generate theory, because of course, grounded theory is explicitly a methodology which is about the development of theory. So here's a kind of a quick schema of the methodology of grounded theory. And these are the kind of characteristics and the key things that let you know that something is a grounded theory methodology. And of all of the methodologies we're going to talk about in these 2 lectures, grounded theory is the one that has the most guidance associated with it. So there's the idea that we start very open, we collect good quality data, we do coding and comparison early, so we're looking at comparing pieces of data. We're using memos and diagrams, and memos, conceptual memos, very important in grounded theory as ways to start doing analytic thinking very early. We refine the concepts or the processes that we're interested in our research. We have that iterative process there of sampling theoretically. So theoretical saturation, this is where the idea comes from, that we go back and collect more data to inform our analysis, but that future sampling is based on the developing theories or ideas that are coming out of our analysis. So we go through that iterative process of data collection and analysis until we get to a point where we can express a theory of a social process. And grounded theory is very much oriented to trying to understand and explain a process. So something, a process about how the social world works. Grounded theory is very popular in health and medicine, which is both good and bad. It's good because it means people are familiar with it, even if they're not very familiar with qualitative research in general. I think it can be bad because it can be used as a kind of label that gets put onto any qualitative research, whereas actually there are very particular characteristics of grounded theory. There is a lot of direction about the method. Not so much from the first book, Discovery, but Glasser and Strauss wrote more. Eventually, Glasser and Strauss's partnership broke up, and Strauss repartnered with Corbin and wrote a textbook that outlines those procedures, and it's a very procedural textbook. Kathy Charmez has written a book called Constructing Grounded Theory, which is a more constructivist approach to grounded theory with lots of really practical guidelines and suggestions. Grounded theory is very interested in detailed comparisons and in the development of categories. And categories are a code that you've decided is a really important code in your data that helps to explain something important that's happening in the process. So there's lots of these buzzwords in grounded theory, much more so than you find in other methodologies. One of the nice things about grounded theory, I think, is that it encourages to keep going until you have a big picture, until you have a really comprehensive story to tell about your data. So let's move on to a second methodology. Again, one that I think is actually people are quite familiar with, and again in health and medicine are quite familiar with, and this is ethnography. So let's kind of give you a bit of a sense of the context of where it came from. So ethnography really originated as a form of knowing about distant cultures. So distant cultures were seen as impenetrable, and so we needed to go and spend time there. And this is a quote for Bronislaw Malinowski, who was an anthropologist who was, again, interested in those distant cultures. So you can kind of see some of the historical origins here. I'm talking about anthropologists as moving away from kind of the safe space of sitting inside libraries or missionary compounds and actually going out into the world of the people and the cultures that they were interested in. At the same time, Robert Park, who was part of the Chicago School, was interested in much more urban environments, so less about distant cultures, but still different, often different cultures. And you'll see a very similar kind of encouragement in this quote to researchers to get beyond the library and to go out and spend time in the world of the people and in the culture that they were interested in. So this is, I guess, coming from the perspective, so moving from the armchair or the library into the field, and very much ethnography became a primary method of anthropology then, with an attempt to try and understand the values or the institutions of a particular culture or society. So there was an assumption that there's some kind of internal logic to that culture, and that we can go find it. We can go and through experiencing it grasp the internals of that culture. So the characteristics of ethnography, this is a quote from Gobo talking about that early kind of development of ethnography. And I think a lot of these ideas actually are still very resonant with the kind of contemporary ethnography. So that the researcher establishes direct relationships with the social actors, staying in their natural environment. So really spending prolonged time in the world of the people and the culture that we're interested in. And that applies whether we're talking about going into communities or villages in distant cultures, or we're talking about spending time in a hospital ward, or the kinds of things we heard Rowena talk about when she talked about observation as a data collection. So Gobo also talks about the purpose of observing and describing social actions by interacting with them, so people, and participating in their everyday rituals and practices and learning their codes in order to understand the meaning of their actions. So lots of really important ideas here about a particular approach to research. So what's special about ethnography as a methodology? Well, it always involves direct observation in a field. So that kind of idea of observation as being the primary or defining characteristic in terms of data collection. We also often see analysis of documents and interviews with key informants as a way to get access or a way of understanding the ways of that a culture works. Long engagement is something that we always see in ethnography, and that's a real contrast to the kind of one-off interviews that we see in a lot of other methodologies in qualitative research, sometimes called the hit and run approach, where we just go and spend an hour talking to somebody and then we leave. Ethnography is much more about really spending time with people and with communities. In ethnography, there's a real emphasis on detailed description. And we got that when we all tried out doing observation of our videos, and that idea of very detailed field notes about the kinds of things that we're seeing. And the analysis that we do is based on those what's called thick description. Another important feature of ethnography is what's called emic, which means from within. And this is about really trying to understand the perspective of the people in the culture or the context that we're interested in, and that's different from the scientist or the researcher's perspective, which is called etic. So it's really about trying to get inside that culture to try and understand it. Observing actions as they are performed in concrete settings. And I think this is one of the really nice features of ethnography, which is really trying to see things and using our subjectivity as researchers to get a sense of, using all of our senses to see and smell and hear all of the different kinds of actions that there might be happening in an environment in order to get a sense of them, as well as getting perspectives from the people who are performing those actions. We get different kinds of insights. And finally, that ethnography is really interested in culture, in shared patterns of behavior, belief, and language. For most of its history, ethnography has been based on shared geography. So a kind of a sense in which the way that people have or develop shared patterns of belief or behavior or language comes through people being geographically together. But of course, those kinds of things are changing with the advent of the internet and the ways in which communities might be existing virtually rather than geographically in the same place.